Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott, and this is dedicated to all those spirits out there who believe life is meant to be magical and fun. Here we venture to share the very mysteries of self and reality. My purpose is to help light that spark inside of you, to reawaken your sense of fascination and awe towards the world. I'm going to try to help you hack reality and unleash your potential and open unlimited possibilities of wealth, health, and relationships in your life. Welcome, fellow members of the Reality Revolution. Today's episode is dedicated to the space of variances, as described in reality transurfing. Now, it's very interesting. If you've listened to my other podcast episodes, sometimes I do deep dives on certain subjects within reality transurfing. It's a very common request, and those seem to be very popular episodes. And I've created a meditation as well, and I'm not sure if we're going to separate it after we record this or we're going to do it at the same time. But somebody had asked me to do a meditation for the space of variations. And so I went back and did a lot more research on the idea of the space of variations so that I could create the meditation. And it just came to me that I should do a deep dive on this. So if anybody wants to listen to this before the meditation, I think this is going to help a lot with how we design this meditation, because I think it's one of the most fascinating and probably the most important subject to understand in reality transurfing. Now, the interesting thing is when you do, and you pull up your Kindle copy of reality transurfing and you do a search for space of variations, you will find nothing. That's right. If you have a Kindle copy right now, you'll find the term doesn't exist in the current Kindle copy of reality transurfing. When you look up space of variations, there's a rock band called Space of Variations, and it looks like that they got their band name from Vadim Zeland's book. If you look at, there's an original version of reality transurfing that was also taken from Russian to English and translated, and it appears there may be a difference in translation or a difference in the use of the word. Now, the choice of word that is exchanged in reality transurfing is alternative space. So are they the same thing? The words seem to connote something different, and the space of variations is what I'm trying to get at very often with a lot of my meditations when I talk about the void, when I talk about source, connecting to an information field. That is why I personally believe that wedding the ideas of meditation to reality transurfing is very fascinating. And you have heard my other meditations if you've ever gotten a chance. I have so many, but I've tried to integrate plat activations with normal chakra meditations. I have plat activation meditations. And so I wanted to create a series of meditations designed around some fundamental concepts of reality transurfing, like importance, balancing forces, pendulums, and space of variations. So this will be a discussion of that, because I believe that the discussion of it may be more important than the meditation. If you note in the first chapter of reality transurfing, the first chapter is about the alternative space. The book opens up with an unusual example of the writer. We're assuming the writer is Vadim Zeland from his perspective, and he meets a guardian who gives him a riddle, and it appears that it happens in a dream, and the guardian tells him that he has the choice, and we don't even know what that means. And then there is a discussion of the alternate space. Now, this, without an understanding of it, even the meditation probably won't be as effective, and it would appear a lot of times what I'm talking about in the meditation sounds a little bizarre or hard to understand. So the idea of this alternate space that has the source of information for all different variances in alternative space that we have access to. And the concept that's discussed by Vadim Zeland is very interesting, and I want to go over what he is talking about. But I also wanted to initially also discuss the commonality. What Vadim Zeland is a physicist, and so sometimes understanding the physics behind this and where it's coming from is even more important. The idea that there's an energy or information field or an ether has been discussed in physics for a very long time. Physicist Konrad Finagle posed the obvious question regarding the significance of space, asking, consider what would happen if we took away the space between matter. Everything in the universe would scrunch together into a volume no larger than a dust speck. Space is what keeps everything from happening in the same place. The pioneering anthropologist Louis Leakey once stated, without an understanding of who we are, we cannot truly advance. And I believe there is a lot of truth to this statement. The way we've seen ourselves in the past worked well enough to get us where we are today. Now it's time to open the door to a new view of ourselves, one that allows for an even greater possibility. It may be that our reluctance to accept just what it means for space to be occupied by an intelligent force and for us to be part of that space has been the biggest stumbling block in our understanding of who we are and how the universe really works. Because even though this is in physics, we're getting into very powerful religious questions, and it's your choice to make. I will give you the information. In the 20th century, modern science may have discovered what's inside of empty space, a field of energy that's different from any other form of energy. And I've given an example of stories in other podcasts of Indra's web, this web of jewels. Then each jewel has all of it. You can see the reflection of all of the other jewels. And it's a matrix. It's a very fascinating story, but the idea fits into this idea of the matrix. And Newton also had theorized there was an ether, suggests this energy appears to be everywhere, always, and to have existed since the very beginning of time. In a 1928 lecture, Albert Einstein said, according to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable, for in such space there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space. Max Planck stated the existence of the field, this information field that we're talking about, suggests that intelligence is responsible for our physical world, and we must assume behind this force that we see as matter the existence of conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And when I say the word mind, that instantly has a certain stereotype. That's just a word. But the idea of it's an information space. So understand that the idea that there's an information space, it's not a crazy thing. What I'm proposing to you is not insane. It doesn't go against any religions. It's based on fundamental science. And understand the brain. So understand how the brain works. The brain has three main functions. And the first two involving perceiving your environment and interpreting it, according to Vadim Zeland in Tufti the Priestess. And the third is less well known and involves the settings for the memory, one's thinking and conditioning. The brain does not generate thoughts or store memories. It works similarly to a radio or a TV set. When you remember something, the brain attunes to an information block situated in the eternity archive. That's when you remember something. It's an archive. When you think about something, it also attunes, scans the information, and in this way creates from it a flow, which manifests as a train of thought. Thoughts and memories are not stored inside the brain. They are stored outside of the brain, where you would expect information to be in this information space. So understand, one big revelation when you read about enlightened beings and people that reach levels of enlightenment is this idea that we are not our thought. And it's something that is a very powerful revelation that you come to with advanced forms of meditation. A lot of different programs in meditation are really designed to bring you this truth that you are not your thoughts, and your thoughts are not you. And it's amazing to understand the power of that. But once you do, you can tune into this information space when you wake up inside this archive where there's all this information. The interesting thing about it, this eternity archive has memories of information that hasn't happened yet. But you can go into a memory of something that's already happened in this informational sector. And the science of it is clear. Greg Braden's wonderful book, The Divine Matrix, does a fantastic job of establishing very fundamentally about this particular field, which Abraham calls source, which Abraham claims to be. On the smallest levels of the universe, atoms and subatomic particles do in fact act as if they're connected. The problem is that scientists don't know how, or even if the behavior that's observed on such tiny scales has any meaning for the larger realities of our daily lives. If it does, then the findings suggest the amazing technologies of science fiction soon may be a reality in our world. As recently as 2004, physicists from Germany, China, and Austria published reports that sounded more like fantasy than a scientific experiment. In Nature, the scientists announced the first documented experiments of open destination teleportation, sending quantum information about a particle, its energetic blueprint, to a different location and at the same time. In other words, the process like faxing a document, and the process destroying the original. Experiments have demonstrated equally impossible sounding feats such as beaming particles from one place to another and bilocating. There is a field that they're starting to interact with in this science that makes these things possible, and that's this field. You've heard about the 0 point field? And imagine when they look at all the little movement inside a little drop of space, and this tiny part that is at 0 point. And it is very small, but very powerful. And that makes up the universe. They talk about dark matter, but there are alternative theories and mathematical models that claim that when you start to integrate the idea of this energy field, it can take away some of the mathematical requirements for dark matter. And dark matter may in fact be the same thing on some level. Composing reality, according to Zealand, is about choosing the film roll, not about controlling the script. There's this information field, space of variances. And the idea is that if you go outside right now, you can get a hamburger, you can go and have a salad, you can walk to the park, and there is millions of different variants, different choices that you have when you do this. And each one is a script that's in this archive. And when you move along these decision paths, it creates waves of different circumstances, cause and effect, based on our material, scientific understanding of the world that we're in right now. So when you start to look out on this information sector, if you can access the information from it, and then learn to move through it as if it's a moving stream of information. And if you can use your mind to focus and change and adjust your place of attention, you can do incredible things when you understand the space of variances. It's the idea that you are composing reality, you're choosing the script. And the script is beyond your power. You're not given to know what exactly the script should look like in order to bring you to your goal. You don't get it, it's not exact, right? But the script itself that you're choosing will get you to that goal. And you have to choose the script and actually become part of the script. When you're moving into the flow, you retain an awareness of the moment, but you would retain an awareness of moving towards in through this script. Okay, that's the fascinating, and you don't even need to know. You're working as a film projector. Once the goal frame is illuminated in your projector, the course of events will automatically turn out as they should. In choosing the film roll, you set a new script in motion. The script does not belong to you, but the events that have been recorded on it. Moreover, without your knowledge, only the goal frame is yours. The film roll chooses itself in accordance with the specified frame. You imagine you have this whole movie and only one of the frames is the one that you put in there out of millions. And be ready to cross that path because you're going to get to that frame. You don't have to understand exactly how this happens. Illuminate your frame again and again, and you will shift from one roll to another until you eventually arrive at your destination. In the Eternity Archive, film rolls are arranged in parallel according to Zealand and Tufti the Priestess. The scripts of the film rolls placed most closely differ only in minor nuances. In composing reality, you gradually shift from one to another. So remember that you're not jumping all the way a room and putting an entirely new film in. The films shift from one to another because the frames have to be closer to each other. First, you appear on a film roll where the result is close to the set goal but not quite there. Then it gets closer and closer. All this takes place invisibly to the eye and at a different realization speeds depending on the complexity of the desired goal. Simple goals are reached almost immediately, whereas more challenging ones that require you to go far require time and patience. Your task is to focus your attention on the impeding frame. The script is not a matter of your concern. You can't worry about how it's going to work. If you try and set the script or resist it, you'll get caught in its trap. Don't worry if you're getting sucked into the script. And when trying to influence the course of events, you take the reality of the current frame in a death grip, which is pointless. The harder you hold on, the more tightly you will be gripped by the tail, by the plait that it is. So, what we believe to be our stable, static universe, when we're starting to compose these realities, is in fact a seething maelstrom of subatomic particles fleetingly popping in and out of existence. And although Heisenberg's principle most famously refers to the uncertainty attached to measuring the physical properties of the subatomic world, it is also another meaning attached to that we cannot know both the energy and the lifetime of a particle. So subatomic event occurring within a tiny frame involves an uncertain amount of energy, largely because Einstein's theories and his famous equation, E equals mc squared, relating energy to mass. All elementary particles interact with each other by exchanging energy through quantum particles, which are believed to appear out of nowhere, combining and annihilating each other in less than an instant, 10 to 23 seconds to be exact, causing random fluctuations of energy without any apparent cause. The fleeting particles generated during this brief moment are known as virtual particles. They differ from real particles because they only exist during that exchange, the time of uncertainty allowed by the uncertainty principle. How I like to think of this process as akin to the spray given off the thundering waterfall, but this subatomic tango, however brief, when added across the universe, gives rise to enormous energy, more than is contained in all the matter in all the world. Also referred to by physicists as the vacuum, the 0 point field was called 0 point because fluctuations in the field are still detectable in temperatures of absolute zero, the coldest possible energy state where all matter has been removed and nothing is supposedly left to make any motion. 0 point energy was the energy present in the emptiest state of space at the lowest possible energy, out of which no more energy could be removed. So the closest that motion of subatomic matter ever gets to zero. But because of the uncertainty principle, there will always be some residual jiggling due to the virtual particle exchange. Fluctuations in the atomic world amount to ceaseless passing back and forth of energy like a ball of ping pong. And this energy exchange is analogous to loaning someone a penny and you're a penny poorer. He's a penny richer until he returns the penny. It's constantly going back and forth according to physicists. The 0 point field is a repository of all fields and all ground energy states and all virtual particles according to Lynn McTaggart. A field of fields, field exchange of virtual. Every particle radiates energy. The 0 point energy in any one particular transaction in an electromagnetic field is unimaginably tiny, half a photon's worth. The research on this is totally fascinating, but when we look at what Zeeland is talking about, he starts out with the riddle and that we have the choice. And he discusses the idea that we have only one fate, and it's simply not true, even though our script is set, that we can choose a different script. He's talking about the script in the reality transurfing, very similarly to Tufti. As he says, fortunately, there's a glimmer of hope that comes from totally different view of things. The solution is as simple as it is enjoyable in contrast to the views I've described. In transurfing, the concept of fate is based on an alternative model of the universe. Before you wave your hand in disappointment and decide that you are being fed yet another chimera, remember that every known concept of fate originates from a specific worldview, which in turn is based on a number of unproven principles. And he goes in to talk about materialism and idealism and how they're founded and the different philosophies to explain. And then he describes the classic parable of the three blind men describing an elephant in a different way, the way they're looking at it. And you have to understand, you have no doubt heard the idea expressed that reality is an illusion created by the mind. But no one has explained in detail where the illusion is coming from. And so that's what he's talking about in the first chapter. And that's why it's so important. He didn't decide to do it in like the 7th chapter. It's the first one. Does it mean that we all are, in a sense, watching a film, he says? Of course. It's highly unlikely that a concrete, rational substantiation of this idea will ever be upheld. Others still oppose the opinion that the material world is simply a mechanism which functions according to its immutable laws and cannot be governed by human consciousness. There is surely an irrefutable grain of truth in this idea. The human mind likes to have its feet on solid ground, free of ambiguity, and so for centuries, scholars have been tearing one theory to pieces in favor of another, which is then placed on a high as a pedestal. After every fight on the intellectual battlefield for truth, just one fact remains undefeated. Every theory represents a separate sense of the phenomena of a multifaceted reality. Each theory that stands the test of time has its place, for they all represent one aspect of reality. He's basically giving you the understanding that there's all these different theories that you can consider, and goes on to give you the idea that you should test this out and test it for yourself. That's the only way to understand if it really works. Any aspect of reality can be taken at a starting point and subsequently developed into a whole field of knowledge, and it will have logical consistency and successfully reflect one manifestation of reality. An entire field of knowledge can be substantiated by just one fact, which, although not fully understood, has its place. And then he goes on to talk about quantum physics is based on a number of unproven truths and postulates which cannot be proven because they are at the basis starting point for a given field of knowledge. In quantum physics, a microcosm sometimes acts as a particle and sometimes as a wave. Unable to provide an unambiguous explanation for such dualism, scientists took the phenomenon to be an axiom. The postulates of quantum physics bring together different aspects of reality in all its diversity of form, just like the blind men in the parable that he mentioned before, and in one case proclaimed that the elephant functions like a stump and another like a snake. If in describing the microcosm one chooses to start with its particle quality as fundamental, then one arrives at the model of the atom created by Niels Bohr. And the Bohr model, the electrons rotate around the nucleus like planets in a solar system. If, on the other hand, one takes the main quality to be wave, then the model of the atom will look like a blurry dot. Both models work, reflecting different manifestations of reality, and in this case, one could say the scientists get what they choose, which is any manifestation of reality can serve as a postulate or the basis of an argument, which will undoubtedly make sense and have its place in search of truth. People have always striven to understand the nature of the world, studying its individual parts. So, one of the reasons that this was so appealing to me when I read Reality Transurfing is that he makes a good argument of why you should just consider it, give it a try. He's saying, don't trust me. If you apply these principles, then it works. But I was interested in the idea of the alternative space, the idea that there's this space that we're working with. Could a graph be created, he says, that marked the position of all points of matter? Of course, one theoretically marked the coordinates of the infinite number of existing points in the universe, but the capacity of humans' memory is too limited to cope with such a massive amount of data. Nature, on the other hand, has no difficulty with eternity. Nature has no need of a formula to generalize the position and movement of points on a graph. If the graph line were to be broken up into infinitely smaller points, then every point could be seen as a cause and the next point as a consequent effect, whereby any movement of a point of matter through time and space could be perceived as an infinite chain of infinitesimal examples of cause and effect. So the idea is, in nature, as he is saying, that they have eternity, and due to its time and nature, that it can always break these cycles as cause and effect. And in science, we describe the movement of matter in terms of laws. But in nature, this movement exists in a natural form as the infinite flow of cause and effect. He does a good job of utilizing the way that nature has balancing and why we need to be understanding of different kind of potentials occurring. And they're good things to consider. Now, he defines alternative space, which is the space of variations, as a material information structure. It is an infinite field containing information on all possible scenarios of any event that could ever possibly take place. Think about that. It's an infinite field containing information on all possible scenarios of any event that could ever possibly take place. That is what we have access to if we access the space of variations. One could say that the space of variations contains absolutely everything. We can hardly guess that the form of this information takes, and yet our purpose here does not require us to know. The important thing is to establish that the space of variations serves as a template or coordinate grid for the movement of all matter in time and space. Every point in space contains its own version of a given event. For the ease of understanding, let us say that each variation, which is the space of variation, or version has a script and scenery. The scenery is the external form of the phenomenon, whereas the script is the path that the matter moves along. For the sake of convenience, the alternative space can be said to have different sectors. And he does mention this a number of times, the sectors that form an alternative space. And it's good to think of them as sectors. The greater the distance between the sectors, the more the script and scenery will differ. A person's destiny also has numerous alternatives. Theoretically speaking, there are no limits to the scripts and sceneries of human existence because the space of variations is infinite. Any seemingly insignificant event can affect a twist of fate. A person's life, just like any other movement of matter, represents a chain of cause and effect events. In the alternative space, the effect is always located in the close proximity to its cause. One follows the other, and so the sectors of a person's destiny create a lifeline. And so we have an understanding of the lifeline is the sector and the destiny that's set into the script. The scripts and the settings of the sectors on one line are more or less uniform. A person's life flows evenly in one direction until such time as an event occurs that changes the scripts and the sceneries. When this happens, destiny takes a turn and shifts to an entirely different lifeline. I've experienced, for sure, moving on to a different lifeline, having a very traumatic event happen in my life. And I saw an example of the space of variations as I started to apply these concepts, going into deep different kinds of meditation and taking action in different ways to test these concepts. I had a traumatic event occur where some people came into my house and they attempted to kill me, and they shot at me and the bullet bounced off my back. And the whole chain of events that occurred felt like a script that I was following, and the entire event felt like a memory that I had. And in the moment, I just let go, and because I moved into the script, of what was happening. But I had a very powerful moment where time slowed down. It seemed like I could see all of the different scripts that had happened. What had happened is they were outside, and I quickly shut my porch door, which had double pane glass, and they were shooting with a .22, and the bullet broke through each level of glass. So by the time it got to my back, it had slowed down, and as I moved away at the right angle, it bounced off. And it's interesting, if we start to really get closely attuned to what's happening in the moment and the way the script can happen. I personally believe this is where this information really syncs up with Stephen Kotler's research right now about flow. And they're finding that people are at a much better efficiency, and the executives are, when their minds can reach into a flow state. And they've studied people that ski and different extreme sports and people that are in flow, and they've studied this very deeply. And it's very interesting. When your mind is in flow, you can be more creative. They can get more done. It's the kind of efficiency that is really unbelievable. And so it's amazing. All of these different variations that you have around you. Now, there's some interesting things that he goes on to discuss. So you're questioning, how do we access this? Experiencing lifelines placed very close together is like watching a play, he says, and then the next day going to the theater again to see it. Same play, but this time the stage scenery is different. If during the next theater season you saw the play with the same actors, but there had been significant changes to the script, this would be like experiencing a lifeline situated slightly further away in the alternative space in the space of variations. Finally, if you watch the same production in a different theater, you would see a totally different interpretation of the play. And this would be like experiencing a lifeline that exists in a significantly distance from the first one. So now understand what we've gone over is he is making the importance of the closeness of these lifelines. And so he has mentioned this multiple times. I've read this already several times. I do notice the recurring theme of that these lifelines are close to each other. And so there are ways for you to work within your current lifeline where you have things that are happening and they're close. You can sense it, and and you work with chains of different actions, one at a time, that move you towards what it is that you're trying to do. That's when you start to really think about reality creation on a much more advanced level, that it's happening every millisecond. And it really requires a powerful level of moving into flow, into frame of the script, and seeing it right then as it's happening, getting as close as you can to it actually happening in the moment. So that's why it syncs up with people talking about mindfulness and being in the moment, because you can really get close in the flow. But we can also access information from this. And so reality has such diversity of form because the number of different alternatives and choices and variations for its manifestation is limitless. Any starting point for one or another form of manifestation results in a chain of cause and effect relationships. One could say that reality unfolds through life depending on the selection of the original reference point, and so ultimately everyone gets what they choose. You have the right to choose precisely because of an eternal number of alternatives and variations that already exist. No one is preventing you from choosing, because you can always choose. And going back to the Guardian's riddle at the beginning of the book, the riddle was that we have the ability to choose, and that is true. We always have the ability to choose, and our choice is more important than you think. That's the riddle of the entire book. That's the riddle of the idea of reality creation. Why it speaks to us is that we have the choice, and we're awakening to that right now, and it's an amazing revelation. One could say that reality unfolds through life depending on the selection of the original reference point, and so ultimately everyone gets what they choose. You have the right to choose precisely because an eternal number of different variations already exist in the space of variations. No one is preventing you from choosing the destiny you would feel comfortable having. Managing your own destiny comes down to one single thing: making the choice. So the interesting book is that this podcast, what we've tried to do is show you how to make those choices and start to really study your subconscious mind and linking your heart to your mind. How do you make those choices? And Transurfing is one place for you to see how to make that choice. So an information structure exists that contains an infinite number of potential variations, each with its own unique script and scenery. The process of transformation into physical reality corresponds to the laid down in whatever is laid down in the information structure. So how matter moves through the alternative space or the space of variations can be demonstrated by the following metaphor. Now, this metaphor I've gone back to and listened to, and I'd love to get your comments in this video or on the podcast as what your interpretation of the water analogy, because he's talking about how reality occurs, and it's very interesting, and I think there is more to it. This water pipe analogy, which we can use in the meditation. Imagine a water pipe with a cooling ring that moves slowly along the pipe, causing the water inside to freeze it. The effect of the cooling ring makes it look as if a crystal of ice is moving through the water. Water molecules tend to remain in roughly the same place in a relatively free state. At the moment that the cooling ring passes through the given section of water, the molecules inside the ring are solidified into a frozen crystal. As the ring moves further down the pipe, the frozen water in the area behind the ring melts again, and the molecules are freed up. It's not the crystal itself that moves. In other words, it's not a single chunk of ice that floats through the water, but the potential to create the structure of ice, the frozen state. The water in the pipe serves as an analogy for the alternative space, and crystal of ice as an analogy for material manifestation of a particular alternative. The water molecules are like people, and their position in crystal structure is like a manifestation in physical reality of one possible fate. There is no single answer to the question of what the cooling ring symbolizes, he says. In other words, how and why the information structure transforms into physical matter, no one can say. And he's using this analogy that we're seeing reality in front of us and it's becoming crystallized by this ring. And I've read that and I always come to it, and I'd love to get your interpretation. I interpreted his basically saying is that we are the cooling ring and we are what's creating our reality. But as we move along, those molecules are freed up and you start to see the passage of reality. It's moving in that direction. You can see where a plait would form and other things like that when you start to really visualize what this energy would be doing. So it's interesting. He says that we know that in a vacuum, for example, microparticles undergo a continual process of birth and annihilation, suggesting that matter is present and yet does not represent a physical substance. The one thing that is clear is that the things that we can touch have an intangible, energetic foundation to them. So I hope I haven't overwhelmed the people listening with too much talk about physics, and particularly when right before a meditation. But I just wanted to give substantiation, and that's what Zealand does in the book at that point in time. The wave is an analogy that is used in the book is he says it's another analogy of the process, and remember, this is the second analogy. The first one was water in the pipe. So the wave is another analogy for the process of physical manifestation, which is the actual process of us creating our reality, in which the sea is the alternative space. The sea is the space of variations, and the wave, the material manifestation of a given alternative. Take a wave that forms in the sea after an earthquake. It looks like the wave moves across the surface of the sea in a hump, but in fact the water remains in the same place. It is not a mass of water that is moving across the sea so much as an energetic potential for transformation into physical reality. Only when the accumulation of water reaches the shore, it breaks on the ground. Any other wave behaves in the same manner. So this made me think when we talk about particles and waves in physics. And obviously, Vadim Zeland is a physicist. And so that when something is not collapsed into reality, it's in a wave form which contains all of the infinite possibilities in that form. And the waveform moves like a wave and is what is causing this reality. So there's a feedback loop. Does this mean that material manifestation moves through time and space while the potential alternatives remain in one place for eternity in the space of everything that was, is, and will be? Why not? Time of itself is as static as space. The passing of time is only felt when it turns like film footage, one shot following another. If you unroll the film and look at all the frames put together, there is no time because all the frames exist simultaneously. Time is static. Once we start looking at each frame in sequence, it is the same in life, which is why the idea that everything comes and goes is so deeply rooted in our minds. Everything that is recorded in the field of information has always been there and always will be there. When I'm doing my meditations and I'm taking you into the future and the past, I'm trying to give you access to this information space so you can see what it would like if the Big Bang happened, this huge explosion of energy. Obviously, that still exists in the space of variations, as is any possibility that you can think of. The energy of it, if you tune into it, you can have incredible lucid dreams that are wonderful and fantastic. So incredible, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I know I've had some unusually strange and weird meditations, and I'm experimenting with this, and it allows you to get into a deep part of your subconscious, because think about that. Our subconscious mind is also creating this reality. So there's a part that we don't necessarily have control over, but we can influence. And we need to be able to learn how to use our influence of our subconscious mind. And that's the one thing that is kind of discussed in this when he talks about the heart and the mind. But that's the passage of time, is when you have the film roll. Everything that is recorded in the field of information has always been there and always will be there. Lifelines exist like a reel of film. And we're just going on a film right now, and there's an end, right? Things that have happened in the past do not disappear, and what is yet to be in the future is already present here in the now. The current section of a person's life is a material manifestation of the space of variations in this section of their lifeline. This idea might be slightly perturbing, and you may be asking yourself how it is possible, according to Zeland, for countless alternatives of your own fate to exist in stasis. Who is responsible for this? God or the laws of nature, perhaps? Or was it all just one thought, according to the law of one? Imagine a point on a coordinate grid. Zeland says, in school we are taught that any point on the grid can have any x and y coordinate from the minus to plus infinity, and yet it does not occur to anyone to ask why a point can have absolutely any coordinate. Imagine if the point that moves along the function line were surprised and asked, how can this be that the path I have traveled so far has always existed and always will? And how can it be that the path I am about to travel has already been outlined in advance? It's a really crazy and daunting thought. It would seem strange to point out, but not to you, because you are observing its path from above, able to see things from a different perspective. The idea that everything's happening has already happened. And it's a shocking idea, because everything has already happened in the past and the future. So that's why I have my time travel meditation, because I'm trying to give you access in the space of variations to different areas of time. I think it's very powerful for your own intuition to use this kind of a meditation. And I'll try to do another one, but check out my time travel meditation. The space of variation serves as a template that determines how physical reality can show itself. So imagine a person walking through a dark forest with a torch. In the dark, the person's holding the torch lights up a small area around themselves. The entire forest is like the space of variations, while the area which is lit up like the physical manifestation of the variations in that area. The question remains as to what provides the light. In other words, what ignites, materializes a particular alternative or variation within the template. To answer this question, Zeeland went on to take a different starting point. Nowadays, most people agree that thoughts are material. There is also evidence that reality takes two forms. On the one hand, material existence defines consciousness, and on the other hand, there is clear evidence to the contrary, indicating that consciousness also defines physical existence. Therefore, thoughts not only provide the motivation for human action, they also have a direct influence on our reality. For example, according to Zeeland, our worst expectations generally tend to come true. Of course, one could argue that this is not because our thoughts were materialized, but rather that our thoughts were premonition of impending misfortune that would have occurred anyway. There is undoubtedly much that is unclear and ambiguous about paranormal phenomenon. However, that does not mean that one should ignore or negate the relationship between thought and the process of material realization. Much evidence exists to indicate the direct impact of thought on reality. So what does this mean, and how can we use this in our meditation? I wanted to keep going because I'm still learning this, and it's interesting when you hear it from a different perspective. And I have new thoughts that pop up when I go through these. But this is just the first chapter on the space of variations. And so how do we create that meditation to really focus in on accessing the space of variations? And I certainly do think that you can't go into it bringing anything else, baggage, memories. So that's why I like the idea of the void, a place that you can go to where you don't bring anything with you, because then everything is available to you. Whatever you bring to it will limit whatever you can access in the space of variation. So if you bring your identity, if you bring your history, if you bring whatever you're bringing, that all will limit what you can access in the space of variations. So imagine if anything is possible. That's being able to clear your mind, and limiting your thoughts is obviously very important. And that is why it's important, because that's when meditation can really access the space of variations. One way or another, individual consciousness shapes a person's destiny. And so we focus specifically on how this is possible. The thought energy transforms possible variations into physical reality. This statement is correct because reality can be manifested in any form defined by consciousness. Evidence of this hypothesis can be found not only in everyday life, but also in the experiments of quantum physics. For our purposes, the specific mechanism by which thought energy interacts with the space of variations is of no great consequence. It is not yet clear by what means the transfer of information takes place, whether on an energetic level or by some other means. For convenience sake, we will simply work with the idea that thought energy lights up a certain sector of the space of variations, and as a result of which one alternative is transformed into physical reality. So waves of thought moving out in a wave find the sector in the space of variations that corresponds in quality, and the alternative of that sector is then made manifest on the physical level, marking the process of how consciousness creates reality. That's amazing. Think about that. Think about if you took responsibility for literally everything that you saw, everything that you can see or sense with your senses, you're creating. That's amazing. And yet we all act as if we're in the back of the bus just going for a ride on this bus, when you should walk right up to the front of the bus and take the steering wheel and take control and drive that bus and make that choice. That's what you can do. Thought energy transforms possible alternatives into physical reality. You should bear in mind that this is only one way of manifesting reality. Generally speaking, it is not possible to create the reality you desire simply by sitting in one place and contemplating it. So if you think you can just sit by yourself wherever you're at and you're going to have miracles happen for you, they're not going to happen when you're just sitting there. You got to take action. And this is the call to action that Zealand is giving us. Although people do exist who are capable of materializing objects, literally out of thin air, he says, they're very few in number and, as a rule, do not advertise their abilities. Nonetheless, thoughts have as much impact on a person's destiny as concrete actions do. So they're just as important. People are used to the idea that there is a visible and clearly comprehensible connection between their actions and the consequences of them. By contrast, the impact of one's thoughts manifests imperceptibly and so appears inexplicable and unpredictable. It might seem difficult to determine a causal relationship between one's thoughts and subsequent events, but soon you will see that the connection is quite direct. A person gets what they choose. Some may conclude that Zealand is saying that the seas and the mountains and planets and galaxy are all just a product of their personal thought energy. And this is because people have a tendency to consider themselves the center of the universe, whereas in actual fact, they are just a tiny dot in an infinite space. The world is inhabited by millions of living organisms, and every single one of them contributes to the creation of reality. Now, that's an important thing that Zealand is saying that needs to be acknowledged. He is saying that the world is inhabited by millions of living organisms, and every single one of them contributes to the creation of reality. So we're interacting with everybody else's reality creation. So that is why there are some out there that believe in the law of attraction, that nobody else affects their manifestations. And that's the difference in this model of the reality transurfing, is taking into consideration the other people's thought sectors. And what we're still learning is still very limited, but we are riding a wave around these energy fields of groups of people, pendulums. And when you have the wave, you have to balance on the wave. And if it's too important, you end up leaning too far one way and the other, and you can fall right off. But if you keep the balancing forces of this, it's pretty amazing. So when you think of it, it's truly a remarkable thing. But he says that, we all live in the same world, and yet every individual moves along their own lifeline. The qualities of the material world are the same for everybody. It is just that its concrete realization is unique within the context of a person's life. For example, imagine that you're a tourist walking around a beautiful city. You admire the sights and the architecture. You take in the flower beds and the fountains, the park avenues, and the smiling faces of the city's prosperous inhabitants. Then as you pass by a rubbish bin or a garbage can, you see a homeless person. He is in the same city as you, in the same dimension, but he does not see what you see. He sees an empty bottle in the bin, a dirty wall, his competitor, who wanted the bottle too, and a policeman eyeing him with suspicion. You live on a lifeline and the homeless man on another. Your lifelines intersected at a point in the alternative space of variations, bringing you together into the same world in the dimension of physical reality. So that's an interesting way of looking at it, and going back to what he said, the way that the homeless person is that he is looking at the empty bottle in the bin. And he's looking at the dirty wall and his competitor who wanted the bottle too. And I get notes and letters and messages from different people that are in really tough spots. And help me, what am I going to do? I need to find a way to get a job, or my country is just so bad and I don't know how to escape it. And that's what I'm dedicated to, is finding a way that I could put you in a place where you could remove what you're seeing around you so that you don't let it affect your reality, and create another reality by separating yourself from your reality, because you have your environment all around you is creating reality. The people around you are creating reality. So if we could create a force field of some kind so that we could do that, and that's what sometimes what I'm trying to do in my meditations. So the circumstances of a person's life are not only created by their actions, but also by the nature of their thoughts. If a person has a hostile attitude towards the world, they will find the world responds to them with the same. If a person constantly expresses dissatisfaction, they will find more and more reasons to be dissatisfied. And if a person's attitude to life is predominantly negative, the world will show them the worst side of its nature. Conversely, having a positive attitude is the most natural way to change your life for the better. People get what they choose. The Guardian's riddle. That's what the Guardian said. Like it or not, that is how life works. Whilst your thoughts are pretty much homogeneous, you will stay on the same lifeline. So you need to change your thoughts. You need to change your thoughts. If you have the same thoughts, you have the same reality. And as soon as your relationship to reality changes in any way, the parameters of thought energy take on new characteristics, and the material manifestation of the layer of your world shifts to another line. So, as soon as your relationship to reality changes in any way, the parameters of thought energy take over. So understand, he's saying your relationship to reality. And so our discussions of reality start to change these things. And on this new lifeline, events unfold according to a different script, in accordance with the parameters of thought. If for some reason you dislike the new script, you will struggle to change the situation. People tend to react negatively when they come up against obstacles, expressing their dissatisfaction or following in despair. As a result, the thought energy they radiate refocuses to a line in which the number of obstacles is even greater, making it seem as if their life is a slippery slope. And we always talk about things in waves, in consecutive actions, things, when you talk about transurfing. that's interesting. And there is a slope, and these things move in waves. You don't just have one bad thing happen, you have 3 bad things. And there's different variations of what happens. So reality is manifest in a variety of ways. And the space of variations is the world's most fundamental thing. It's the variability is the world's most fundamental quality. Any model of the universe represents just one manifestation of reality. And any branch of knowledge bases itself on one chosen aspect. So the idea is, while your thoughts are pretty much homogeneous, you'll stay on the same lifeline. So you got to change your thoughts. The space of variations contains an infinite number of possible lifelines for every individual. No one should feel hard done by if they do not like their fate, because everyone has the right to choose. Anybody can choose whatever they want. The problem is that we do not know how to choose. The world has such diversity of form, and one would think it has created to satisfy any need. Everyone can find whatever their heart's desires. Even in the academic world, life manifests the side of it we wish to see. For example, idealism holds that the world is an illusion, and life agrees. Materialism says the opposite, and again, the world has nothing against that. People argue with each other, trying to force others to accept their relationship to the world, and yet the world shows that they are right. Is that not wonderful? The space of variations is the so-called illusion and material realization, which is meant by physical reality. We always get what we choose. Those who are familiar with the principles of Islam will understand what is meant by a person's fate is written in the book. This means that fate is preordained and therefore cannot be changed or avoided. Sometimes statements can be found in other religions. In a sense, a person's destiny is indeed already preordained. The error of a religion is in teaching that there is just one version of a person's fate, when in fact there are endless alternatives. They say you cannot avoid your own fate, and to some extent, this is true. There is a fate for whatever script we choose. They say you cannot avoid your own fate, and that is true. It is impossible to change the script within any given variation of it. To battle with the world around you in the hope of changing your fate is a difficult and thankless task. It is not worth trying to change the script. It is far more effective to choose a different alternative, more like to your liking. This might be strange, but may quite reasonably have your doubts. And Zeeland says that he didn't accept the alternative model just like that, and he didn't believe it himself. And it's not the model itself that has meaning so much as what it can help you achieve. So he's saying even if it doesn't work, accepting the model is what can help you achieve. And I talked about that and in some interviews that we've had so far on the reality revolution, the accepting the framework of being able to access this kind of information is also very powerful. And so there are different mathematical models can illustrate the same physical phenomenon in different ways. And so there he talks about geometry and mathematicians. It is hard to believe in the existence of parallel worlds. Having said that, so Vadim Zeeland has doubts about the parallel world. How easy is it to believe that the theory of relativity, which claims that an accelerating body increases its mass, reduces its size, and slows down through time through which it moves? It is impossible to test the theory firsthand. But that does not matter. It does not matter whether we understand a theory. What matters is the practical benefit that we can be derived from it. So we don't need to understand the theory behind this. In the context of infinite space, it is ridiculous, even petty, to argue about the advantage of one model over another. Try to imagine the infinite terms of increasing distance that never reaches a horizon. Oddly enough, infinity in terms of decreasing distance has no limit either. We can observe only a limited portion of the visible universe from telescopes, and microscopes have their limits. Nonetheless, infinity in the context of the microcosm is no different from infinity in the terms of the macrocosm. There is a theory that the visible universes emerged as a result of the Big Bang. According to the theory, the universe has been constantly expanding ever since. Celestial bodies move through the cosmos with phenomenal speed. But when we take into the account the huge distances involved, it seems as if the expansion of the universe is taking place incredibly slow. It's also well established for a fact in a vacuum at any given moment in time, elementary particles are born out of nowhere and then immediately disappear. We do not yet know the exact structure of elementary particles, but given the relativity of time and space, there is nothing to stop us perceiving each particle as if it were a separate universe like our own. So imagine that every particle has a universe of its own. Physicists claim that they can appear either in the form of waves or in the form of particles. The further one goes into the microcosm, the more relative distances appear huge. For the internal observer, time slows down. To an external observer, our universe might appear to last for one brief moment, like a particle birthed and extinguished in a vacuum. Whereas we, its internal observers, perceive the universe to have been in existence for billions of years. And when he says, the next time you take a mouthful of coffee, ask yourself how many universes you've just swallowed. That's amazing. So every single bottle of water is just filled with different universes. Infinity cannot be divided into parts. And so if you think about it, every time you swallow a mouthful of coffee, you're swallowing in an infinite number of universes. Flying through a microcosm takes as long and seems as far as it does flying through the boundless expanse of outer space. Time, like space, goes on for infinity, whether you look backwards or forwards. Intervals of time can be as infinitely large as can be infinitely small. Any point within a time interval can be seen as a reference point, both sides of which extend into the infinity of time. Changing the reference point to another place within the time interval does not change the extent of infinity in either direction. The infinity of worlds within worlds exists simultaneously. The center of the universe is at the same time to be found in every point of matter, because every point is surrounded by infinity on all sides. All events exist concurrently for the same reason that the center of the universe is located in every point at the same time. This is difficult to imagine, but so is impossible to grasp. Infinity in one moment of contemplation. Even more convoluted theories have been designed, which claim that the visible universe becomes a finite sphere in fourth-dimensional space. But that does not help, particularly because theoretically speaking, an infinite number of dimensions could exist. Unable to clearly imagine all of this, we have to content ourselves with narrow perspectives, at least pretend that we understand something of these theories. Since there are many things about contemporary science that are impossible to explain, however, this should not prevent us from benefiting from the fruits of scientific thinking. Applying the principles of transurfing can lead to stunning results. The important thing is to decide from the very beginning not to torture yourself with questions of why and how exactly it all works, which would be as productive as a child asking a physicist why different bodies attract. The scientist would reply, because the law of gravity. The child then follows with the next question: how does the law of gravity work? Why do bodies attract? There is no answer to this question, so we will leave the thankless task to explain these other things, for it is not ours to know and understand everything. We simply enjoy the results of the space of variations model. For the space of variations model, it follows that man can create his own destiny in transurfing. The concept of fate differs from other more widely accepted interpretations. The difference is that in the context of transurfing, a person can choose their happiness. They do not have to fight for it. There is no need to accept or reject the alternatives model or the space of variations idea straight away. First, ask yourself this question: have you achieved much by battling with the world to find happiness? Each person will decide for themselves whether they wish to carry on in the same vein or whether they would prefer to try using a different method. A person can spend their entire life battling without achieving anything at all. Would it not be simpler to act in a way that encourage life to meet you halfway? For all life does is to help manifest your personal choice. Whatever your order, your choice is always granted unconditionally. Choice, however, is different to desire. Wishes are only granted in fairy tales, and most people just keep on wishing. It is no wonder that the belief is so ingrained in our minds that wishes are very difficult, if not impossible, to fulfill. We have already taken the first small step towards solving the riddle that is the Guardian's riddle in Vadim Zeland's intro of the idea of that we have the choice. And soon you will find out why wishes are not granted and dreams do not come true, is how he ends the first chapter of Reality Transurfing. And it's interesting to go back to and to try to create a meditation around that. Could be kind of interesting. I'm looking at 1 hour, 11 minutes and 11 seconds right now. Anyways, I just wanted to go over that with you, and it gives you a better understanding. Is we're trying to access this space of variations, and we're actually receiving quantum information all the time in our brains through different energy centers in our bodies, and we need to learn the subtleties of what parts of our mind are looking for things and what parts of our things are signs that we can see. And I will definitely do an episode coming up, and we'll talk about things like 1111. That's on the list. There's lots of new stuff coming out soon, some shorter meditations, and it's a blessing when anybody ever listens or watches the podcast. Greatly appreciate it. And anytime you have any questions, email me at media@advancedsuccessinstitute.com. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. Thank you and welcome to The Reality Revolution. I'll have a meditation soon, I promise.